Matthew chapter 24, verses 19 through 13, and then 45 through 51. Jesus is speaking and he says, "You will be arrested, punished, and even killed. Because of me, you will be hated by people of all nations. Many will give up and will betray and hate each other. Many false prophets will come and fool a lot of people. Evil will spread and cause many people to stop loving others. But if you keep on being faithful right to the end, you will be saved." So who are the faithful and wise servants? Who are the ones the master will put in charge of giving the other servants their food supplies at the proper time? Servants are fortunate if their master comes and finds them doing their job. You may be sure that a servant who is always faithful will be put in charge of everything the master owns. But suppose one servant thinks that the master won't return until late. Suppose that evil servant starts beating the other servants and eats and drinks with the people who are drunk. And if that happens, the master will surely come on a day and at a time when the servant least expects him. That servant will then be punished and thrown out with the ones who only pretended to serve the master. There they will cry and grit their teeth in pain. For those of you with siblings, I want you to take a moment to think about this question. Which one of your siblings is the favorite? Now, maybe one of you was more favored by your mother, another by a grandfather, and even if your parents favored you equally, you will have still felt like the one who was favored or not favored at one time or another. And you know what these times are. Your siblings know. You've talked about it. You've fought about it. And you have definitely used it in arguments to manipulate a situation so that your feelings and what you want are justified. I have 5 sisters, and they do not all get along, and they don't always like me. But we can tell you the dynamics, and if we're being honest, pretty quickly. And these types of dynamics are complicated and highly emotional at times. They are what make our families, our closest friends, and our greatest frustrations. There is no group in which we can love more deeply and fight more fiercely. This is the understanding of love and hate at its most vulnerable. Let us remember this as we look at today's scripture. Matthew 24 is not the one directly chosen on the website talking to kids about the Poor People's Campaign. In fact, the scripture for the 4th principle, which is those being bullied and hurt should lead. The scripture for that is guided by Matthew 25, the popular parable of the sheep and the goats. While Matthew 25 is one of my favorite scriptures, I was curious to see what came before it. What comes before the story of the sheep and the goats? What comes before and even parallels the question asked in Matthew 25? When did you welcome me as a stranger? Or when did we welcome you, Jesus, and give you clothes to wear? When did we visit you while you were sick or in jail? when. So if we go back to chapter 24 and read through this entire chapter and figure out what we experience with it, initially, many react with fear at this story and scripture. Matthew has a lot of what we would call end times or apocalyptic writing. Like many of us, the disciples asked curious questions to Jesus, including, hey, Jesus, what happens at the end of the world? Or what happens when you are gone? And it's not an easy explanation. In fact, I don't think that the scripture even tries to answer that question of when, because that's not the focus we should have in our faith. In fact, chapter 24 reminds us to stay diligent when we do not know what is coming and when it is coming. It does, however, answer what the world looks like and feels like when it's ending. And in our linear thinking, we are always moving towards an end. And I would argue that these types of hurtful and detrimental and troubling types of images happen over and over again because as humans, we struggle to feel loved and worthy and accepted. Instead, we always seem to give in to emotions of jealousy and distrust and manipulation. These emotions create divisions. But then within those divisions, it can create some really strong relationships. And those kind of relationships, while loving in some amazing ways, can also create more division and hate. It is the ultimate sibling rivalry and the greatest sibling relationship, all seeking approval, validation, and the attention of others. And so it is easy to get bogged down in Matthew 24 because of its intensity and divisive nature, especially focusing on the unknowns, which is scary. And when we face the unknowns, we are forced as humans to face our transgressions and engage in deeply vulnerable ways. But most people don't want to engage in vulnerable ways. They want to read through Matthew 24 and just find the answers to the questions. They look for facts, which aren't there. They're not looking for the faithful ways to struggle, no matter what the situation. So we are confused and it is chaotic. And then you combine those with misinformation, misunderstanding, and miscommunication. And you find yourself feeling like the end is around. Rob and I have been spending some quality time watching Avenger movies. There is a superhero quote. It says, "Our very strength invites challenge. Challenge incites conflict. And conflict breeds catastrophe." Well, my faith in God is my strength. Is it yours? And so I act upon that strength, which means those actions do at times incite conflict. And does it breed catastrophe? Especially when others are not seeking their strength and action in loving and godlike ways. Because that same superhero has another quote. He says, "They, humans, think order and chaos are somehow opposites and try to control what won't be. But there is grace in their failings." So we serve God. with this same type of knowledge of grace. Because as we read Matthew 24 and 25, the ways we truly and vulnerably serve God is by serving humbly one another. What matters continues to be serving God and God's beloved creation, even when it feels like the end, even when others may hate you because you are trying hard to love those unrecognized and serve and empower others who are trapped in the middle of this chaos. And while we say and know that all of creation matters to God, we must name what that really means. First, it does mean that those who are bullies still matter to God, because God knows their hearts are hurting. And those who are being bullied still matter, because they know, and God knows, their souls are shattering. But being loved by God does not mean, as humans, we should tolerate the manipulation of that love by one another. Thus, those who are being manipulated, oppressed, and devalued are the ones who can speak and lead best at showing all of us how to thrive in God's love in the middle of chaos, how to stay rooted when things are difficult. I think about it as the last shall be first and the first shall be last, because going to the back of the line means you believe everyone is worthy to get served in the line. But sometimes somebody's going to take more than their share. A brother or sister will use the family system to their advantage when fearful of rejection, when fearful there's not enough, because insecurities are often the only thing that seems to be the ongoing certainty, especially when we forget God is a certainty. So one of my most passionate prayers continues to be that my children love each other and can be there for each other through life. I tell them all the time, they're the only two who are really going to know how crazy their parents can be. And while they are beautiful as individuals, the power of their love when exploring life together is spirit-filled. They know the best and the worst of each other. And yet, even with that knowledge, they are willing to serve and engage with each other. We are part of the human family. And we are the only ones who know what life on this earth is like. So why do we fight for what we have all been given by God? Why are we constantly seeking ways to serve ourselves and not serve, learn, and engage with one another? Why do we only take care of our families and not God's family? Why do we listen to the false prophets and get trapped in the confusion when we are called to serve and lift others? And if loving others is why you are hated, then ignore those goats. Ignore those who are trying to manipulate God. They are serving themselves. They are not serving God, God's creation, and God's people. And thus we say we want to try to serve God. That is our focus and our energy. That is how we stay prepared for whatever comes our way. And thus we serve. Serve those who are not served. Those who are unheard, unrecognized, and to many, unrelated. These are the dynamics. These are it. You choose. Good servant, evil servant. Sheep, goat, bully, bystander. Other, self. And someday, when Jesus asked the question, "When did you welcome me?" When did you welcome the stranger, the hungry, the thirsty, the hurting? When? Well, you know the answer to when you served God.